You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. Let's continue your look at the Washington primary ballot now. The future of Washington's new millionaires tax is at stake this election season. And I'm not just talking about the ballot measure asking voters to weigh repealing the tax in November. The justices on the state Supreme Court will decide a separate legal challenge to that historic measure. And in a highly unusual scenario, 5 of the court's 9 seats are up for election this fall. Tuesday's primary will determine the candidates for 4 of those races. Here to help us wade through who's running and what's at stake this year is Jonathan Martin. He is a writer for the Washington Observer, a former Seattle Times editor. And this month, the Cascadia Daily News announced he's going to be their new editor-in-chief starting in September. Jonathan, welcome and congrats on your new adventure there.
Thanks, Libby. It's a pleasure to join you.
So I mentioned this is unusual to have so many state Supreme Court seats on the ballot this year. Like 5 out of 9 are up for election. That's a majority. Why so many up for election this year?
Well, broad strokes, the Supreme Court runs in 6-year terms. Each seat is up for six years, and 3 of them were already going to be on the ballot. What's unusual this year is there were 2 vacancies, people who either decided they were not going to run or quit before their term was out. So, and that one of them was appointed, or actually 2 appointments on the ballot. And Raquel Montoya Lewis decided she was not going to run again. So you have there is an unusual number. The appointments are interesting because a majority of the court right now is, I believe 6 of the 9 justices overall have been appointed by the governor and then stood for election. And for the public, that's noteworthy because when people are appointed, they almost never lose. So it's effectively handing the governor an opportunity to pick a Supreme Court.
Can you remind us, so the governor is just able to appoint once a seat becomes vacant, and they can do that just with their discretion?
Correct. I kind of view it as a gift to the governor from the judicial branch to the executive branch. They go through an application process, and they get lots of great applicants. I think that one of the challenges for voters is that because you see all these people on the ballot, and they all have impressive resumes. They're all lawyers. They've got accomplishments up and down. It is sometimes hard to figure out who people actually are. So these campaigns are generally fought with kind of coded signals to people, and that the coding kind of goes to who endorses them, who's giving them money. One of the things the justices can't do is talk about pending cases. And I know we're going to talk about some of the big pending cases, including the millionaires tax. But I know it's going to be a bit frustrating for voters as they go tune into candidate forums in the fall, where these candidates are going to get asked all these questions. How would you rule on this? How would you rule on this? And they won't say, or they shouldn't, and so you have to kind of look at the sort of signals of how somebody is running. You can see that in their backgrounds, how they're talking about themselves on the campaign trail, and then who likes them with endorsements or money.
So there are 5 seats that will be on the ballot in November. Voters will see 4 of them on the August 4th primary election ballot. That's because there's 1 seat with just 2 candidates, so they automatically go through. That's position 4. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of position by position, Jonathan, I mean, let's talk about those stakes. I mentioned the millionaires tax. Like, how big of a deal is the makeup of the Supreme Court when it comes to seriously big rulings that, could come down and affect average people's lives?
The stakes are very large, primarily this year because the definition of what individual property is, which is the core of the case against the millionaires tax, will be before these folks, almost undoubtedly. So that would, a ruling on one side would open the door to a broad income tax in Washington. A ruling against it would set back the progressive cause of an income tax probably forever. But it's not just that case. The court has tremendous power over things like the criminal justice system, The court, I think, on criminal justice has been perceived as being to the left of both the legislature and the voters. They decriminalized drug possession, effectively decriminalized drug possession a few years ago in a case called the Blake decision, which had enormous ripple effects across the criminal justice system. They also have the power to rule on things like privacy. There's a enormous debate going on in Olympia right now about what the liability of the state is, how exposed the state is to financial payouts to people that were harmed by the state, which have risen dramatically, in part because the Supreme Court, which has a lot of trial attorneys on it and has a lot of trial attorneys supporting candidates, have gotten generally favorable rulings from the court. So, there's some cases involving past initiatives that are before the court right now involving the Climate Commitment Act. There's a big case involving the legislature's power to basically police county sheriffs, who can become a county sheriff. Kind of a theoretical thing, but it's a big constitutional question. So those are some of the issues that are before the court. There's also lots of labor cases. The court has ruled a lot on labor.
Not to pile on, but there's the question of whether the legislature can rake in $4 billion from the fire and police fund to balance the budget, right. The pension fund. Yep. That lawsuit's going on. And literally, as we speak, coming across the wire, a ruling from the state Supreme Court about the liability of Washington State University over a hazing case right. from 2019, a young, really sad case where a teenager died in a hazing incident, drinking incident where the friends didn't call 911, and state Supreme Court says that WSU can be liable for that. I mean, it's just right. like a myriad across different parts of our lives that these elections are going to have an impact on. Let's get into each of these races, if you don't mind, here. And again, this is going to be just like a lot of numbers and names flying at people. And we understand. We're going to try to help, you like talk about where you can find better information and what kind of signals you can kind of separate from the noise here. So positions 1, 3, 5, and 7 are on the primary ballot. And I'm just going to start with position 1, which is currently held by Colleen Melody. She was formerly the chief of the Civil Rights Division in the Washington State Attorney General's office, and she was appointed by Governor Ferguson last November to replace retiring Justice Mary Yu. Melody here, Jonathan, seems to have really racked up, all the Democratic endorsements. And her opponents, Laura Christensen Kohlberg, a family law attorney, and Scott Edwards, an attorney practicing constitutional and tax law, have a they're not calling it an endorsement, a recommendation from the state Republican Party. What stands out to you about this race where Colleen Melody is trying to defend her seat that she was just appointed to?
I mentioned before kind of trying to figure out the coding of the folks on the ballot. Colleen Melody was appointed by Bob Ferguson and had worked for Bob Ferguson in the Attorney General's office for years as the head of Civil Rights Division. You see from her endorsements, like she's, of course, got Bob Ferguson's endorsement, as well as the Democratic establishment. So if you are going to think about maybe how Colleen Melody, we haven't really seen her in action much since she was just appointed in January, how she might rule, you could probably guess she's going to be generally siding with democratically aligned interests. Scott Edwards is one of a handful of candidates that there's already some independent money that's starting to come into the race. There's interest by probably the business community and some of the more sort of centrist conservative folks, political forces that is interested in tilting the court. I think what they would say to the center, but probably to the right either way. And Edwards is one of the folks that started benefit from independent expenditures.
Moving on to position 3, this is where Justice Raquel Montoya Lewis is leaving her position. She's retiring at the end of her term in January, not leaving early like other justices in order to leave a vacancy for the governor. She is running out that term, and running to fill her seat are 3 judges, Mike Diaz, Jamie Hawk, and David Stevens. Now, this one seems like it's pretty competitive, especially because it appears that on the left there is some disagreement over which of the judges, Mike Diaz or Jamie Hawk, people in the Democratic establishment and also on the left have decided to get behind. What are you seeing out of this position 3 race, Jonathan?
I mentioned before that the justices stepping down midterm can be a gift to the governor's office to appoint the justice. Montoya Lewis decided to do the other thing, which is just not run again. The day she announced that she was not running again, Mike Diaz filed his paperwork with the state. Not maybe by a day or two apart, but don't hold me to the day. But it was very clear that Mike Diaz knew
He
that
was quick
Montoya
on the
Lewis,
draw, is what you're
yeah,
saying.
very quick on the draw. Mike Diaz is actually at one point had been nominated for the U.S. District Court, for federal court under Obama. But he was one of those judges that the term is McConnell, where he got basically his appointment got shelved by Mitch McConnell in that great purge at the end of potential Obama appointees. And again, impressive resume. I think that when he got into the race, I think the assumption was that he was going to be a very strong candidate who has a good track record now as a district court judge, or a superior court judge, and an appellate judge. I think the surprise for among the political kind of class was the entrance of Jamie Hawk, who is a superior court judge. She had worked for the ACLU for a long time, has real kind of criminal justice reformer cred. Is also the partner of State Treasurer Mike Pellicciati. So in this race, I think that the general perception is that you have two pretty strong candidates running in the left lane, and David Stevens is clearly running in a right lane. He's one of those justices that has been one of those candidates that has been had some independent expenditure already on his behalf. So I think this would be one of the more consequential choices for voters this election. Dig in on both those candidates, particularly Diaz and Hawk, because they would be probably the favorite moving forward in November.
Just want to point out that Jamie Hawk has the endorsement from The Urbanist, which is generally kind of a leftist, well, as its name suggests, urbanist-oriented publication. And Mike Diaz wrapped up the Seattle Times and the Stranger's endorsement. Not always that some, candidates on the left will unite both the Seattle Times and the Stranger.
It's unusual.
Yeah, David Stevens with the state GOP recommendation there, Mason County Superior Court Judge David Stevens. Okay, that is position 3. Moving on to position 5, where Justice Theo Angeles was appointed by Governor Ferguson in March, replacing retiring Justice Barbara Madsen. Angeles is running to keep the seat. This is another one that has the left split. Theo Angeles has 3 challengers. That is Sharonda Amamillo, Thurston County Superior Court Judge, Dave Larson, retired Federal Way Municipal Court Judge, and Greg Miller, an appellate attorney. What are you seeing in the position 5 race?
Yeah, Theo Angeles is running as the quote incumbent, but the new car smell is still on him. He just got appointed I believe in April. He's a white shoe corporate defense lawyer, very successful, very charming. If you meet him, I think you can tell why he's a very successful lawyer.
K&L Gates, yeah, fancy firm in Seattle.
Yeah. There was some head scratching about Bob Ferguson appointing his former colleague at K&L Gates, and sounds like a friend, because frankly, the corporate defense law bar is not super popular with Democrats right now in the era of the eat the rich billionaire blowback. Theo Angeles does have quite a bit of work doing pro bono defense of immigration cases, and has an inspiring personal story as well. This immigrant family. Dave Larson is an interesting character. He's run 4 times at least. I might have missed one. And he's really kind of running. He has definitely been kind of a right lane candidate, but he's really kind of running as a judicial reformer. He's got a pretty compelling white paper about the problem with the appointment process. I think he's actually done the math, and I think he said like 80% of the Superior Court judges in Washington have been appointed by governors and not first elected. Um, and Sharonda Amamio just got the Seattle Times endorsement. She is clearly sort of more in the left lane. I think she's a sort of a challenger for Angeles and his effort to consolidate the Democratic establishment behind him.
The Urbanist also endorsed her, just an addition there, whereas
Yeah.
the Stranger
And
endorsed.
not very many times you find the Seattle Times and the Urbanist agree on a
Yeah.
candidate.
Yeah, and flipping kind of the endorsement dynamics from the last position that we just talked about. In this case, the Stranger endorsed Angelus, Seattle Times, and the Urbanist endorsed Emma Millo. We didn't talk much about Greg Miller, the appellate attorney, but he's also in the race. Doesn't seem like, he has the same kind of juice that the other candidates have at this point. Our final seat is seat 7, currently held by Chief Justice Deborah Stevens, who has been on the Supreme Court since she was appointed by Governor Christine Gregoire back in 2007. So longtime member of the court. She is running again for a 6-year term. She has challengers here. Todd Bloom, a lawyer and CPA who's on the State Bar Association Board of Governors. He is the state GOP recommended candidate, has also been a perennial candidate. He's run for House against Eric Kilmer. He's run for the Supreme Court before. Another challenger to Stevens is Kareem Merchant, former public defender, now in private practice. And finally, David R. Shelby, an attorney practicing family law and estate planning. Now, this is like the true incumbent in the race, Deborah Stevens. She has been in office. This would be her 4th term if she's elected, and, seems to also have kind of wrapped up the Democratic endorsements. What do you see on this position 7 race?
Typically somebody with Deborah Stevens standing doesn't even really get a challenger. So I think it's part of the reflection of the consternation about what is perceived as the left tilt of the court this year, that she's actually getting a bunch of challengers. That being said, the 3 folks combined have raised virtually no money. And, Deborah Stevens has a great reputation within the bar and the judiciary.
So those are the 4 positions that are up for election on the August 4th primary election ballot. As I said, positions 1, 3, 5, and 7. In general, for folks, we've talked about endorsements here, Jonathan, but before we go, what do you recommend for people who still feel like overwhelmed with this choice? How do you recommend they proceed kind of prepping themselves on how to approach these races?
It's a little challenging because there's not been very many forums, kind of debates, the classic kind of places where you can see these candidates in action.
It's because they can't say anything in debates, right?
Yeah, I know. Again, it's super unsatisfying.
Yeah, these judges.
Tell you, having interviewed them, it's many of them.
I can't comment on this. I can't comment on that. Yeah.
I do think that the endorsements matter. I would read and pick your. I used to be on the Seattle Times editorial board, so I know this endorsement process. I would read the endorsements of whatever publication or endorser that you find credible, because they've taken the time to hopefully do deeper dives. And you could also look for some code words about, if you say you're really mad about the income tax, you can find somebody who's going to be talking about tax, whether we're an overtaxed state or something like that. If you really care about privacy, then look for candidates talking about that issue. If you really care about the immigration issues, who's choosing to spend their precious time talking to voters about which issue they're picking. There's many, many issues judges can talk about, and pay attention to what they're choosing to talk about.
Do you actually think that there will be an ideological shift on this court after November, based on how these races are shaking out so far? Just because 5 of 9 of the seats are up for election, it doesn't mean that there will actually be like a substantial change in how the Supreme Court aligns here, right?
Well, Libby, you'd have been in this industry long enough to know that predictions are a terrible thing in politics.
I'm trying to pin you down on one.
One prediction I think I can make is that given the stakes and given the interest this year, you're going to have more money coming into this race. I think this is going to easily be the most expensive Supreme Court cycle we've ever had. Hopefully, we don't have something like Elon Musk throwing $100 million at the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. But I think that there's going to be enough money where you're going to have independent groups that are either going in and attacking individual candidates or defending them. And they can be more free with what they say than the justices themselves. So I do think we're going to have some sharper ideological lines drawn, at least through that independent spending during this fall.
Jonathan Martin writes for the Washington Observer. He's a longtime Seattle area journalist and the new editor-in-chief of the Cascadia Daily News starting this fall. Thank you so much for wading through the Supreme Court races on the primary ballot. It is not an easy job, and I think we picked the right guy for it. So thank you, Jonathan.
Always love your work, Libby.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or, of course, on your favorite podcast app.